The silence in the great hall was heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from terror and the metallic tang of violence. An hour ago, this cavernous space had been alive with the hum of diplomacy, the rustle of silk robes, the clinking of crystal goblets, and the polite, veiled insults of the southern delegation. Now, it was a graveyard. King Kalen Silverclaw stood in the center of the devastation, his chest heaving like a bellows forcing air into a dying fire. He was a portrait of ruin. His black ceremonial tunic was torn at the shoulder, revealing skin that burned with a feverish, unnatural heat. His hands, large and scarred, were clenched so tightly that the knuckles had turned the color of bone, and fresh blood dripped from his fingertips, not his own, but from the intricate wooden carvings of the high table he had splintered with his bare hands. He was known across the 7 territories as the Ravager, a title whispered to frighten pup wolves into obedience. They said he was a monster, a king who ruled not with law, but with fang and claw. They weren't wrong. The blood rage was the Silverclaw curse, a hereditary madness that rotted the mind of every alpha in his line. It usually began as a whisper, a low static in the back of the skull that demanded violence. But for Kalen, the whisper had become a scream. It was a physical pressure building behind his eyes, a red haze that stripped away his humanity layer by layer until nothing remained but the wolf. And the wolf did not care for treaties or trade routes. The wolf only knew the hunt. Today, a Southern ambassador had made a mistake. A trivial, foolish mistake. He had smirked when mentioning the stability of the northern borders. That smirk had been the spark in a room filled with gasoline. Kalen squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the urge to roar. The beast inside him was clawing at the walls of his mind, desperate to finish what it had started. It wanted to chase the fleeing diplomats. It wanted to tear through the heavy iron doors the guards had barred from the outside. It wanted to paint the stone walls red. "Let us out," the voice in his head snarled, a dual tone of man and beast. "They are weak. They are prey. Break them." "No," Kalen gritted out, the word scraping against his raw throat. He stumbled back, his boot crunching on shattered crystal. He collapsed onto the steps of the dais, burying his face in his hands. He was losing. He could feel the tether snapping. If he shifted now, fully giving in to the rage without a target, he might never turn back. He would become a feral thing, a mindless beast that would have to be put down by his own guards. The isolation was absolute. The guards knew the protocol. When the king enters the red haze, you evacuate. You lock the doors. You pray to the moon goddess. And you wait until the screaming stops. But the screaming wasn't stopping. It was getting louder. Now, before we discover who is foolish enough or brave enough to walk into the den of a monster, if you are enjoying this dark, romantic tale of an alpha king and the omega who tames him, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss anything. The heavy iron doors at the far end of the hall did not burst open. There was no fanfare, no shouting of orders, no armored boots striking stone. Instead, there was a sound so soft it was almost swallowed by the vastness of the room. The click of a latch, followed by the rusty protest of a hinge that hadn't been oiled in years. A sliver of light cut through the gloom. Elara slipped through the crack, pushing the heavy door with her shoulder, her thin frame straining against the weight. She closed it behind her with a soft thud, sealing herself inside the tomb. She didn't look up. She rarely did. Alara was an Omega, the lowest caste in the complex hierarchy of the pack. In the Silver Claw court, to be an Omega was to be a ghost. You were essential, yet invisible. You were the hands that scrubbed the floors, the backs that carried the wood, the unseen force that kept the castle running while the betas and alphas played their games of power. She was 20 years old, though she looked much younger. Years of malnutrition and the shapeless, rough-spun, gray uniform she wore hid any hint of a figure. Her hair, a soft shade of mousy brown that might have been golden under the right light, was pulled back severely and hidden under a frayed linen cap. Her hands were red and chapped from lye soap, her knuckles rough, her fingernails cut to the quick. She hadn't heard the evacuation alarm. The scullery, located deep in the bowels of the castle near the river, was a noisy, steam-filled hellscape. Alara had spent the last 4 hours inside a massive copper cauldron, scrubbing burnt venison stew from the bottom with steel wool. The rushing water and the metallic rasp of scrubbing had drowned out the bells. When she had finally climbed out, wet and exhausted, the head housekeeper, a cruel, sharp-faced beta named Marta, had simply pointed upstairs. "The Great Hall," Marta had barked, not bothering to look Alara in the eye. "Clean it. The delegation has left. If I see a single crumb when I inspect it, you won't eat for 2 days." Alara had nodded, grabbed her broom and bucket, and marched upstairs. She was used to empty threats, just as she was used to the gnawing ache in her stomach. She walked 10 paces into the hall before she stopped. Alara blinked, her pale hazel eyes widening. She had expected a mess. Meetings with foreign delegations often resulted in spilled wine or dropped food. But this was devastation. The massive oak table was split down the middle as if struck by a giant's axe. Chairs were reduced to matchsticks. The velvet tapestries, centuries old, lay in ribbons on the floor. The air smelled sharp, ozone and musk, a scent that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. Most wolves, even Omegas, would have fled immediately. Their instincts would have screamed danger. They would have smelled the lingering aggression of an alpha in distress, a scent so potent it usually forced lower-ranked wolves into immediate submission or flight. But Alara's instincts were broken. Years of abuse, of being told she was nothing, of living in constant fear of Marta's cane or the guard's cruelty, had numbed her. Terror was her baseline. The threat of violence was as mundane to her as the rising sun. This wreckage didn't scare her, because, in her world, everything was always breaking. "Oh," she whispered. Her voice was a rasp, unused and dry. She gripped her broom tighter. It was a simple thing, bound straw in a polished ash handle. But to Alara, it was a shield. It was a tool of order in a world of chaos. "Marta will be angry," she murmured to herself. She set the bucket down. The sound echoed in the terrifying silence. She didn't see the figure hunched in the shadows of the dais. She didn't see the glowing gold eyes tracking her every movement. She only saw the work. She began to sweep, swish, step, swish, step. The rhythm was soothing. It was a heartbeat she could control. She gathered shards of crystal into a pile, the glass chiming softly as it moved. She righted a heavy stool that had lost a leg, propping it against a pillar. Swish, step. As she worked, the tension in her shoulders began to bleed away. The silence of the room, initially oppressive, began to feel like a sanctuary. There was no shouting here, no orders, no Marta, just the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that pierced the high windows. A melody drifted into her mind. It was a lullaby her mother used to hum, back before the sickness took her, back when Alara had a name and not just a rank. The moon is high, the night is deep, the little wolf has gone to sleep. She began to hum. It was a vibration more than a sound, a soft thrumming in her chest that matched the rhythm of her sweeping. And, as the melody took hold, Alara did something forbidden. She let go. The broom was no longer a tool of drudgery. It was a partner. Alara extended her arm, letting the handle slide along her palm. She took a step, not the heavy trudge of a servant, but a gliding step, toe to heel. She spun. Her heavy, gray dress flared out, momentarily hiding her scuffed canvas shoes. She twirled through the wreckage. In her mind, the great hall wasn't a ruin. It was a ballroom. The shattered glass wasn't dangerous debris. It was diamond dust, scattered by admiring gods. The broken table wasn't a symbol of a king's madness. It was a grand stage set for a tragedy. She dipped low, sweeping the floor in a grand arc, then rose on her toes, executing a clumsy but heartfelt pirouette. She wasn't a trained dancer. She was just a girl who, desperate to feel something other than pain, she moved with a fluid grace that defied her harsh life, finding pockets of beauty in the destruction. She spun past the center of the room, her eyes closed, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. She was free. For this one moment, she wasn't Omega Alara. She was just Alara. She thought she was alone. In the shadows behind the throne, King Kalen had stopped breathing. When the girl had first entered, his wolf had surged forward, jaws snapping. Intruder! Threat! Kill it! The red haze pulsed, urging him to leap from the dais and tear the life from her fragile body. But then, the scent hit him. It washed over him like a sudden rainstorm in a desert. It wasn't the cloying, synthetic perfume of the court ladies who threw themselves at him. It wasn't the sour, fierce sweat of his council. It was clean, vanilla, warm, simple vanilla, and petrichor, the smell of rain hitting dry earth after a long drought. It hit the raging fire in his brain and hissed, cooling the burning pathways of his mind. Kalen froze. His claws, which had been digging into the stone floor, retracted slightly. He lifted his head, nostrils flaring as he inhaled deeply, dragging that scent into his lungs. The static in his head, the screaming, the noise, the pressure, stuttered. He watched, mesmerized, as the small Omega moved. He saw the way she didn't cringe at his destruction. He saw the way she picked up the pieces of his rage and organized them. And then he saw her dance. It was impossible. He was the monster under the bed. He was the nightmare of the 7 territories. And this slip of a girl, was dancing in his lair. "Look at her," the wolf whispered. The voice wasn't snarling anymore. It was low, rumbling, vibrating with a deep, confusing fascination. "She is not afraid. Why is she not afraid?" Kalen's gold-flecked eyes tracked her spinning form. He watched the curve of her neck, exposed as she tilted her head back. He watched her hands, rough and red, moving with a delicacy that made his chest ache. A strange sensation bloomed in the center of his chest. right where his heart should be. It was tight and hot, but it wasn't the rage. It was a pull, a gravitational force so strong he had to grip the leg of the throne to keep from rushing forward. He didn't want to kill her. The urge to destroy had vanished, replaced instantly by a terrifying, overwhelming need to possess. He wanted to catch her. He wanted to wrap his large hands around her waist and hold her still, just to make sure she was real. He wanted to bury his face in her neck and breathe in that vanilla scent until the world stopped spinning. She hummed a low, mournful tune, and the sound vibrated through the stone floor, traveling up through the soles of his boots. It acted like an anchor. The chaos in his mind quieted, silenced by the simple purity of her presence. Peace. He was staring at peace personified, and he was terrified that if he blinked, she would vanish. The heavy doors at the end of the hall creaked again. This time, the sound was harsh. Silas, his beta, slipped through the gap, flanked by 2 armed guards. Silas was a brave man, loyal to a fault, but his face was the color of curdled milk. He held a tranquilizer dart gun in one hand, expecting to find a rampant beast or a corpse. Silas saw the girl first. His eyes went wide with horror. He took in the scene, the destroyed room, the oblivious Omega dancing with a broom, and the king watching from the shadows like a predator lying in wait. Silas moved. He stepped forward, his mouth opening to shout, to order her out, to save her life, before the Ravager tore her apart. Kalen moved faster. He didn't shift, but he moved with the supernatural speed of an Alpha Prime. One moment he was seated on the steps. The next, he was standing at the edge of the dais, fully illuminated by the shaft of sunlight. The movement created a shock wave of pressure in the room. Alara froze mid-spin. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, charged with electricity. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. The song in her head died. She turned slowly, clutching the broom to her chest like a lifeline. He stood above her, a dark titan against the light. He was shirtless now, having shredded his tunic, his chest heaving, covered in scars and sweat. His eyes were burning gold, glowing with a terrifying, unnatural luminescence. He looked wrecked. He looked dangerous. He looked like a god of war who had just finished a slaughter. Alara's heart stopped. The broom clattered to the floor. Her hands flew to her mouth to stifle a scream that never came. "Run!" her brain shrieked. "Run! Run! Run!" But she couldn't move. She was pinned by his gaze. Trapped in amber, Silas rushed forward, abandoning caution. "Girl, get back!" he hissed, then turned to the king, bowing so low his nose nearly touched the glass-strewn floor. "Your Majesty," Silas stammered, his voice trembling. "Forgive the intrusion. The girl, she is an error, a mistake of the housekeeping staff. I will have her removed immediately. I will have her punished for disturbing your—" "Silas." The name was spoken softly, but it carried the weight of a falling mountain. It was a growl, deep and vibrating, that seemed to come from the stones themselves. Silas snapped his mouth shut. He looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. "Sire?" Kalen didn't look at his beta. He didn't look at the guards. He didn't look at the destruction he had caused. His eyes were locked on Alara. He was devouring her. He was memorizing the shape of her face, the fear in her eyes, the pulse fluttering frantically in her throat. He took a step down from the dais. Crunch. Another step. Crunch. Alara shrank back, trembling so violently, her knees knocked together. She dropped her gaze to the floor, waiting for the blow, waiting for the pain. It was all she had ever known from alphas. Kalen stopped 5 feet from her. He towered over her, blocking out the sun. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring, dragging that scent, vanilla, rain, anchor, deep into his soul. The wolf inside him settled down, resting its massive head on its paws, content for the first time in years. "Mine," it whispered. He lifted a hand. His fingers were long, stained with blood and dust. He pointed a single claw at the trembling Omega. "The girl," Kalen said. Silas nodded frantically, signaling the guards to grab her arms. "Yes, sire. We will take her to the dungeons. She won't bother you again. We will ensure she is—" "No!" The word was a whip crack. Kalen turned his head slowly to look at Silas. The gold in his eyes flared, and Silas flinched as if struck. "You will not take her to the dungeons," Kalen growled. His voice dropped an octave, vibrating with a dark, possessive intensity that made the windows rattle in their frames. "You will not punish her." He looked back at Alara. She was crying now, silent tears tracking through the dirt on her cheeks. She looked terrified, and Kalen realized, with a jolt of clarity, that he would kill anyone who made her cry ever again, even himself. "Bring her to me," the Alpha King ordered. Silas blinked, his mouth falling open. To you, sire? To your chambers?" "Yes," Kalen breathed. "Tonight, now, have the maids bathe her. Burn those rags she is wearing. If she has a bruise on her skin when she arrives, Silas, I will mount your head on a spike at the gates." He took one last step toward Alara, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. He could smell her fear, but underneath it, he smelled the peace she brought him. "Bring her to me," he whispered, a command that felt like a vow. The walk from the great hall to the royal quarters was a blur of stone and torchlight, a nightmare from which Alara couldn't wake. She was not dragged as she had expected. The guards, usually rough and indifferent to the plight of an Omega, walked beside her with a strange, terrified precision. They didn't touch her. It was as if she had suddenly become made of glass, fragile, valuable, and dangerous to mishandle. Silas, the beta, walked ahead, his pace brisk and nervous. He was barking orders into a communication crystal, his voice tight. "Prepare the East Suite. No, not for a guest. Just do it. Get Marta. Tell her to bring the oils, the expensive oils. And tell the kitchen to send up a tray. Meat, fruit, wine, everything." Alara hugged her arms around herself, shivering despite the warmth of the castle corridors. Her mind was racing, replaying the king's eyes, those burning, golden orbs that had looked at her as if he wanted to eat her alive. "Bring her to me." The command echoed in her skull. She knew what kings did with Omegas. Everyone knew. Omegas were disposable. They were toys to be broken when an alpha was bored, or punching bags when an alpha was angry. And the Ravager? He was the angriest of them all. They arrived at the heavy oak doors of the prep chambers, a suite of rooms usually reserved for visiting queens or high-ranking dignitaries. Silas pushed the doors open and gestured for her to enter. "Wait here," he said, not unkindly, but with a frantic edge. "Do not move. Do not try to run. The windows are guarded." The door clicked shut. Alara stood in the center of the room. It was larger than the entire servants' dormitory. A fire crackled in a marble hearth. The floor was covered in thick furs that swallowed her worn shoes. To her left, steam rose from a massive, sunken bath, scenting the air with lavender and rosewater. The door to the servants' entrance burst open, and Marta stormed in. The head housekeeper looked flustered, her usually severe bun coming undone. She carried a basket of soaps and linens, her face a mask of confusion and irritation. When she saw Elara standing on the furs, her lip curled in a familiar sneer. "You," Marta spat, dropping the basket on a velvet bench. "I should have known. What did you do? Did you steal something? Did you trip in front of him? I told you to clean, you useless rat, not draw the king's attention." Elara flinched, instinctively raising a hand to protect her face. I didn't mean to, Marta. I was just—" "Quiet," Marta snapped, advancing on her. She reached out, grabbing Elara's ear and twisting hard. "I don't know why Silas wants you bathed before the execution, but I'm going to make sure you regret causing me this trouble. When I'm done with you, you'll wish the king had just killed you in the hall." Elara cried out, tears stinging her eyes. This was the world she knew. Pain, cruelty, the smell of Marta's sour breath. Suddenly, the main doors slammed open. Silas stood there, but he wasn't looking at the room. He was looking at Marta's hand on Elara's ear. The color drained from the beta's face so fast, he looked like a corpse. "Marta!" Silas screamed, his voice cracking with genuine terror. Marta jumped, releasing Elara. She smoothed her apron, turning to Silas with a sycophantic smile. "Sir Silas, I was just disciplining the girl. She's filthy, and she was resisting. Did you not hear the order?" Silas walked into the room, his hands shaking. He stopped inches from Marta, lowering his voice to a hiss that was far scarier than a shout. "The king said, 'If she has a bruise on her skin, I will mount your head on a spike.'" Marta froze. Her eyes flicked to Elara, then back to Silas. "What? For her? She's an Omega, Silas. She's trash." "She is the king's request," Silas said, enunciating every word. "And if he smells your fear on her, or if he sees a mark from your hand, he will not just kill you, Marta. He will take his time." Marta swallowed hard. She looked at Elara again, but this time the sneer was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified realization. The power dynamic in the room shifted so violently, it was almost dizzying. I didn't know," Marta whispered. "Fix it," Silas ordered, backing out of the room. "Bathe her, dress her, and Marta, treat her like she is the queen herself. Because for tonight, she might as well be." The door closed. Elara and Marta stood in silence. For the first time in 5 years, Marta didn't look like a giant. She looked small. She looked afraid. "Get in the water," Marta said, her voice trembling. "Please." The bath was an agony of confusion. Marta, who had once beaten Elara for using too much soap, was now scrubbing her back with a sponge made of sea silk. She washed Elara's hair 3 times, massaging expensive oils into the scalp until the mousy brown tangles smoothed out into sheets of dark honey gold. Elara sat in the hot water, her knees pulled to her chest. She felt like a doll being prepared for a shelf, or a sacrifice being prepared for an altar. When she emerged, Marta dried her with towels warmer than any blanket Elara had ever owned. Then came the clothes. Gone were the scratchy gray wools. Marta produced a gown of shimmering silver silk, simple in cut, but obviously costing more than Alara would earn in 1,000 lifetimes. It slipped over her skin like cool water. It had no corset, no heavy layers, just fluid fabric that clung to her thin frame, highlighting the delicacy of her bones. "Sit," Marta said, pointing to the vanity. She brushed Alara's hair until it shone, leaving it loose down her back. She rubbed a scented balm into Alara's cracked hands, the smell of vanilla and jasmine filling the air. When Alara finally looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize the girl staring back. The grime was gone. The exhaustion was still there, bruising the skin under her eyes. But she looked ethereal, like a ghost of the girl she was supposed to be. The door opened. 2 royal guards stood there. They wore the elite black armor of the king's personal detail. "It is time," one of them said. Marta stepped back, head bowed. As Alara walked past her, the older woman didn't sneer. She didn't speak. She just stared at the floor, terrified to even breathe the same air. The king's personal chambers were located at the very top of the Black Tower. The walk up the spiral stairs felt like an ascent to the gallows. The guards stopped at the double doors, carved from obsidian and inlaid with silver. They didn't open them. They just stepped aside. "He waits for you," the guard said. Alara's hand trembled as she reached for the handle. She wanted to run. She wanted to hide in the scullery and scrub pots until her fingers bled. But she knew there was no running from the Ravager. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was massive, dominated by a wall of windows that looked out over the stormy night sky. A fire roared in a fireplace, large enough to roast an ox, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. The furniture was dark wood and leather, masculine and imposing. And there was the smell. It was intense here. Forest floor, musk, and the crackling ozone of power. It was the scent of an alpha prime, concentrated and overwhelming. It made Alara's knees weak, her omega instincts screaming, "Submit, submit, submit." King Kalen was pacing. He was still shirtless, his skin gleaming in the firelight. The scars on his back were a map of violence. Claw marks, burn scars, old jagged lines from battles long past. He moved with the restless energy of a caged tiger, prowling from the window to the desk and back again. He didn't turn when she entered. "Close the door," he growled. Alara obeyed, the latch clicking softly. "Lock it." Her breath hitched. She fumbled with the heavy iron bolt, sliding it home. "This is it," she thought. "This is where I die." Kalen stopped pacing. He stood by the window, his back to her. His shoulders were heaving, his breathing rough and uneven. "Come here," he said. Alara forced her legs to move. The silver silk whispered against the floor. She stopped 10 feet away from him, keeping her head bowed, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to stop them from shaking. Closer. She took 2 more steps. She was close enough now to feel the heat radiating off him. He was running hot, his body temperature elevated by the wolf fighting for control. Kalen turned slowly. When Alara saw his face, she forgot to breathe. He looked exhausted. Deep, dark circles bruised the skin under his glowing eyes. His face, usually a mask of terrifying stoicism, was etched with a raw, naked desperation. He didn't look like a monster about to kill. He looked like a man drowning. He looked at her, his gaze traveling from her loose hair to the silver dress, down to her bare feet sinking into the rug. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. "The noise," he rasped. lifting a hand to rub at his temple. It never stops. The screaming, the blood, it's always there. He took a step toward her. Alara didn't back away. She was frozen. But when you walked into the hall, he trailed off, his eyes locking onto hers. What is your name, little wolf? Alara, she whispered. My name is Alara, sire. Alara. He tested the word, rolling it around his mouth like a fine wine. Alara. Do you know what you are? I am an omega, sire. I am nothing. Nothing? Kaelin laughed, a harsh, barking sound, devoid of humor. You are not nothing. You are the silence. He closed the distance between them in a blur of motion. Alara flinched, closing her eyes, expecting a blow, but he didn't strike her. He dropped to his knees. The shock of it made Alara's eyes snap open. The king of the 7 territories, the Ravager, the man who made warlords tremble, was kneeling on the rug in front of her. He wrapped his large, hot hands around her waist, burying his face in the soft silk of her dress, right against her stomach. Don't move, he groaned, his voice muffled against her. Just stand there, please. Alara stood rigid, her hands hovering uncertainly over his dark, tangled hair. She could feel him shaking. Tremors racked his massive frame, vibrations of tension and suppressed rage. But as he pressed his face against her, breathing in her scent, the tremors began to slow. The quiet, he murmured. It's quiet. Minutes ticked by. The fire crackled. The storm raged outside. But inside the room, the air grew still. Alara's fear began to morph into something else. Confusion and a strange, hesitant pity. He wasn't attacking her. He was using her like a shield against his own mind. Slowly, tentatively, Alara lowered her hands. Her fingers brushed the coarse hair at the nape of his neck. He stiffened for a second, then let out a long, shuddering sigh, his muscles melting. What do you want from me? She whispered into the darkness. Kaelin pulled back, looking up at her. His eyes were still gold, but the frantic, feral brightness had dimmed. He looked human again. I cannot sleep, he admitted, his voice rough with shame. I haven't slept in 20 days. The madness. It eats the dreams. It turns them into blood. He stood up, towering over her again. The vulnerability masked instantly by his imposing height. But he didn't step away. You are my anchor, Alara. Anchor? My blood is cursed, he said, turning to look at the fire. The rage takes us all eventually. My father, his father, we turn into beasts, and we destroy everything we love until someone puts a sword through our hearts. I can feel it scratching at the door. I was ready to let it in today. I was ready to end it. He looked back at her. But you, your scent, your presence, it pushes the wolf back. It quiets the noise. He walked over to a massive 4-poster bed, piled with furs. He sat on the edge, looking suddenly like a lost boy in a giant's body. I am not going to hurt you, he said, and for the first time, his voice was gentle. I am not going to touch you in ways you do not want, but I am going to keep you. Alara felt a chill run down her spine. Keep me? You will not go back to the scullery. You will not scrub floors. You will not leave this room. Kaelin's eyes hardened, the alpha command slipping back into his tone. You will stay here, by my side. When I hold court, you will be there. When I eat, you will eat. And when I sleep, He patted the empty space on the mattress beside him. You will sit. You will just be there. That is your duty now, to exist where I can see you. Alara stared at the bed. It was a command, yes, but it was also a plea. And if I refuse? She asked, a spark of her old survival instinct flaring up. Kalen's expression darkened. You cannot refuse. Without you, I break. And if I break, Ilara, the kingdom breaks with me. Thousands die. Do you want that on your conscience? It was a manipulation, unfair and heavy, but Ilara looked at his scarred face and saw the truth in it. He was holding back a dam of violence with his bare hands, and she was the only thing shoring him up. She took a breath. She looked at the door, locked. She looked at the window, a sheer drop. She looked at the king, a monster begging for peace. She walked over to the bed. She didn't lie down. She sat on the edge, perched stiffly, smoothing the silver silk over her knees. I will sit, she said softly. Kalen let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. He swung his legs up, lying back against the pillows. He shifted, turning his body toward her, reaching out a hand to grip a fold of her dress. Just the fabric, not her skin. Sing, he murmured, his eyes fluttering shut. Sire? The song, the one you were humming in the hall. Sing it. Alara hesitated. Her voice was rusty, unused to anything but whispers of apology. But the silence in the room was waiting. She opened her mouth. The moon is high. The night is deep. Her voice was thin, reedy, but true. The little wolf has gone to sleep. She watched Kalen's face. The tension between his brows smoothed out. The clenched jaw relaxed. His breathing, which had been a ragged gasp for hours, deepened and slowed into a steady rhythm. Dream of the hunt. Dream of the snow. Dream of the places the wild things go. For the first time in 20 days, the Ravager slept, and Alara, sitting in the heart of the beast's lair, watched the rise and fall of his chest and realized the terrifying truth of her new reality. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was the lock on the cage, and for the first time in her life, she held the key. The massive iron doors of the throne room groaned open, the sound echoing like a death knell through the assembled court. It was the first public audience King Kalen had granted in 3 weeks. The air in the antechamber was thick with the scent of fear, sour, acrid, and pervasive. The nobles, alphas, and high-ranking betas of the Silverclaw pack stood in rigid rows, their heads bowed, eyes fixed on the polished black stone of the floor. They were terrified. The last time the king had sat on the obsidian throne, he had ripped the throat out of a treasurer who had stuttered while explaining a tax deficit. The stain was still visible on the steps of the dais, a dark reminder of the blood rage. Lady Vesper stood near the front of the assembly. As a high-ranking beta and the daughter of the Northern Duke, she was one of the few who dared to look up. She was beautiful in a sharp, predatory way, hair like spun copper, eyes the color of moss, and a mind that moved like a viper in tall grass. She had spent 5 years positioning herself to become queen, enduring Kalen's madness because she coveted his power. She believed she was the only one strong enough to hold the leash of the Ravager. Prepare yourselves, Lord Harith, the new treasurer, whispered beside her, wiping sweat from his upper lip. If the rumors are true, he is worse than ever. They say he locked himself in the tower for days, "Quiet, Harith," Vesper hissed. "He smells fear." The herald struck his staff against the floor. "All hail King Kalen Silverclaw, Alpha of the Seven Territories, Lord of the High Peaks." The court held its breath. They expected a roar. They expected the king to storm in, smelling of blood and violence, dragging a trail of destruction behind him. They did not expect the silence. Kalen walked onto the dais. He was dressed in formal black leathers, a heavy fur cloak draped over his broad shoulders. He looked imposing, lethal, and undeniably powerful. But he wasn't storming. He was walking with a steady, controlled gait, and he wasn't alone. A collective gasp rippled through the room, quickly stifled. Walking half a step behind him, dressed in a gown of shimmering gray silk that looked like woven moonlight, was a girl, an Omega. She was small, delicate, her eyes wide and darting nervously around the room. Kalen ascended the steps to the massive throne, carved from a single piece of volcanic glass. He sat, the movement fluid and kingly. But instead of dismissing the girl or ordering her to the shadows, he pointed a clawed finger at the space beside his knee. "Sit," he commanded. His voice was low, a rumble that vibrated in the chests of everyone present. The girl, Alara, sank gracefully onto a plush velvet cushion that had been placed at the foot of the throne. She arranged her skirts, clasped her hands in her lap, and lowered her head. Kalen leaned back. And then, in a gesture so intimate and shocking that Lady Vesper felt her breath hitch, the king reached down and buried his large hand in the girl's hair. He didn't pull. He didn't grip. He simply rested his hand there, his fingers tangling in the honey gold strands, using her as a physical anchor. "Begin," Kalen said. "The court is stunned. The beast has a pet. But as Lady Vesper is about to discover, Alara is far more than just a pet. If you're rooting for the underdog to take down the elite, make sure you're subscribed. The political games are just beginning. Now, let's watch the court crumble." The session began. It was surreal. Usually, court sessions were chaotic. Petitioners would rush through their requests, terrified of triggering the king's temper. Kalen would pace, growl, interrupt, and often end the session abruptly with violence. Today, the hall was quiet. A farmer from the lowlands approached, trembling so hard his staff rattled against the floor. My lord," he stammered. The grain shipments. They were delayed by the storm. We cannot pay the full tithe this month." The court flinched. This was exactly the kind of failure that usually resulted in an execution. Kalen's hand tightened in Alara's hair. His shoulders tensed. The gold in his eyes flared, brightening like coals caught in a wind. The wolf was waking up, insulted by the weakness, demanding blood for the failure. "You dare comes before me with excuses?" Kalen growled, leaning forward. The menace in his voice was palpable. "Do you think the storm cares for your excuses? Do you think my armies can eat excuses?" The farmer fell to his knees, sobbing. "Please, sire, mercy." Kalen bared his teeth. He started to rise, the violence rolling off him in waves. Then, Alara moved. She didn't speak. She didn't look up. She simply lifted one of her small, rough hands and placed it over the king's boot, resting it on his ankle. It was a breach of protocol so severe it should have meant death. An Omega touching the king without permission, in the middle of a judgment. Vesper watched, her eyes narrowing, waiting for Kalen to kick the girl away. Instead, Kalen froze. He looked down at the small hand on his boot. He inhaled sharply, his nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. The tension in his shoulders dropped as if his strings had been cut. The gold in his eyes dimmed back to a simmering amber. He sat back down, his hand softened in her hair, his thumb tracing a soothing rhythm against her skull. "The storm was severe," Kalen said, his voice flat but calm. "We lost a bridge in the east as well." He looked at the trembling farmer. "You will pay half the tithe this month. The rest will be added to next year's harvest. Go." The farmer stared, unable to comprehend that he was still alive. "Sire?" "Go," Kalen rumbled. "Before I change my mind." The farmer scrambled away, praising the king's mercy. The rest of the session passed in a blur of efficiency. Disputes that would have taken hours of screaming were settled in minutes. Taxes were adjusted. Guard rotations were approved. Through it all, Kalen never removed his hand from Alara's head. She was his battery, his grounding wire. As long as he was touching her, the monster stayed in the cage. From her place in the crowd, Lady Vesper felt a cold knot of dread form in her stomach. She had counted on Kalen's madness. She had planned to let him spiral until the council had no choice but to appoint a regent, her. Or she had planned to marry him, endure the abuse for a year, and then have him declared incompetent. But this, a king who was sane, a king who was focused, that was dangerous. And the source of that sanity was the little gray mouse sitting at his feet. "She has to go," Vesper whispered to herself. Later that evening, the castle was buzzing with gossip. The Omega Witch, they were calling her. Some said she had spelled the king. Others said she was a gift from the goddess. Kalen ignored it all. He had retreated to the glass gardens, a massive conservatory attached to the royal wing. It was filled with night-blooming flowers, moon orchids, silver ferns, and luminescent mosses. It was the only place in the castle that smelled almost as good as Alara. He walked the stone paths, his hands clasped behind his back. Alara walked beside him, struggling to keep up with his long strides. "You did well today," Kalen said abruptly. Alara looked up, surprised. "I did nothing, sire. I just sat." "You did not flinch." Kalen stopped and turned to face her. "When I yelled at the farmer, when the guards drew their swords, you did not flinch. I have seen worse than a yelling king," Alara said quietly. Kalen studied her. In the moonlight filtering through the glass roof, she looked ethereal. The silver dress made her skin glow. "Tell me," he demanded. "Who gave you that?" He reached out and touched a thin, white scar that ran along her jawline. It was old, but deep. Alara stiffened, but she didn't pull away. She was learning that Kalen's touch, though heavy, was rarely violent towards her. "Marta," she answered, 3 years ago, I broke a plate." Kalen's jaw tightened. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "Marta broke a plate on your face?" "She used her ring. She likes heavy rings." Kalen turned away, running a hand through his hair. "I should have mounted her head on a spike." "She bathed me," Alara said, a hint of dry humor in her voice. "She was terrified. That was punishment enough, I think." "She looked like she had swallowed a toad." Kalen looked back at her, shocked. Then a sound erupted from his throat that Alara had never heard before. It was a laugh. It was rusty and sharp, like a gate opening after years of disuse, but it was a laugh. "A toad," Kalen repeated, shaking his head. "Yes, I suppose she did. He stepped closer to her. The atmosphere in the garden shifted. The air grew heavy, charged with the same electricity that had filled his bedroom the night before. And this one? Kaelin asked. He reached out and traced a jagged scar on her collarbone, visible just above the neckline of her dress. His fingertip was rough, calloused from sword work, but his touch was agonizingly gentle. A guard, Alara whispered. He had too much wine. I was in the hallway. Kaelin went still. The air temperature dropped. The plants around them seemed to shrink back from the sudden frost of his aura. Which guard? It doesn't matter, sire. He is gone now. He died in the border skirmish last winter. Good, Kaelin said, the word dripping with venom. Or I would have resurrected him just to kill him again. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the map of pain written on her skin. It mirrored the map of scars on his own back, though his were from battles and hers were from survival. We are a matched set, you and I, Kaelin murmured, both of us broken things. You are not broken, sire, Alara said, surprised by her own boldness. You are just loud inside. Kaelin stared at her. Loud, like a storm that can't find the ground to strike, she explained, lifting her hand. She hesitated, then placed her palm on the center of his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it beating, slow, strong, powerful. I can be the ground, she whispered. Kaelin covered her hand with his own, pressing it harder against his chest. His eyes burned gold, intense and hungry. You are the only thing that quiets the storm, Alara. You are the only silence I have ever known. He leaned down. His face was inches from hers. He smelled of pine and power. She smelled of vanilla and rain. The distance between them was charged, a magnetic pull that terrified and thrilled her. He was going to kiss her. The king was going to kiss the scullery maid. Sire! The sharp voice shattered the moment like a hammer hitting glass. Kaelin snarled, spinning around, placing his body instantly between Alara and the intruder. It was Silas. The beta looked breathless, holding a scroll with the royal seal. Forgive me, Your Majesty. Forgive me. Silas bowed rapidly, sensing the murder in the air. But a message from the council. It is urgent. Lady Vesper has formally requested the winter solstice ball be moved forward. Kaelin's eyes narrowed. Why? She says it is to celebrate your return to health, sire, to show the kingdom that the Ravager is tamed. Kaelin sneered. She wants to test me. Yes, sire, and she has invoked the ancient rites. All pack members must attend, including the staff. Kaelin went still. He understood the game immediately. Vesper wanted Alara in the open. She wanted to separate them, surround them with noise and chaos, and see if the king would crack. He looked back at Alara. She looked small against the backdrop of the towering glass flowers. Fine, Kaelin said, his voice cold. She wants a ball? I will give her a ball. He turned to Silas. Tell the seamstresses to prepare. Alara will not be attending as staff. Silas blinked. Sire? Kaelin took Alara's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. A possessive, undeniable claim. She will attend as my partner for the evening, and let Vesper see exactly who she is dealing with. High above in the castle, Lady Vesper stood on her balcony, watching the two figures in the glass garden below. She saw the king hold the girl's hand. She saw the protectiveness in his stance. She swirled the wine in her glass, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Enjoy your moonlight, little mouse," she whispered to the wind, "because when the sun rises on the solstice, I'm going to feed you to the wolves." She turned back to her room, where a maid was waiting with a small, heavy pouch of gold and a stolen necklace bearing the royal crest. "Is it done?" Vesper asked. "Yes, my lady," the maid replied, trembling. "The necklace is hidden in the Omega's mattress, just as you ordered." "Perfect." Vesper drank the wine in one swallow. "Let the king think he is healed. Let him parade her around. The higher he lifts her, the harder she will fall." The winter solstice ball was the jewel of the Silverclaw social calendar, a night where the grim stone of the fortress was hidden beneath silks, velvets, and the crushing weight of expectation. The great hall had been transformed. The wreckage from the king's rage had been cleared away, replaced by towering pines, dusted with magical frost, and thousands of floating candles that cast a golden haze over the room. The air smelled of roasted boar, spiced wine, and the heavy, cloying perfume of 100 desperate nobles. King Kalen stood at the head of the room, near the obsidian throne. He was dressed in formal military regalia, a tunic of black velvet embroidered with silver thread, heavy boots, and a cape of wolf fur that made his shoulders look impossibly broad. He held a goblet of wine, but he wasn't drinking. His eyes, burning with a low, steady gold light, were fixed on the massive double doors at the far end of the hall. He was waiting. Beside him, Lady Vesper shimmered in a gown of emerald green. She leaned in, her voice pitched to carry just enough for the surrounding nobles to hear. "She is late, sire. Perhaps the pressure was too much. It is understandable. A scullery maid is hardly equipped for—" "Silence, Vesper," Kalen rumbled, not looking at her. "She is not late. The bells have not yet rung." As if summoned by his defense, the great clock tower began to toll the hour of 8. On the final stroke, the herald struck his staff against the floor. "Presenting the king's companion for the solstice," the herald announced, his voice trembling slightly. "Lady Alara." The doors swung open. The room went silent. Every conversation died. Every glass stopped halfway to a mouth. Alara stood in the archway. She was not wearing the gray of a servant. She was not even wearing the silver of a guest. She was wearing red. It was a gown of deep, blood-red velvet, the color of the Silverclaw banner, the color of passion, the color of life. It was cut in a style that was both modest and devastating, fitting her slender frame like a second skin before flowing out into a train that looked like a pool of spilled wine. Her hair, usually hidden or braided, cascaded down her back in loose golden waves, crowned with a simple circlet of winter berries and silver wire. She looked terrified. Her hands were gripping the fabric of her skirt so hard her knuckles were white. But she held her head high, her chin lifted in a defiance she had learned from the king himself. Kalen inhaled sharply. The scent of her, vanilla, rain, and now, underneath it all, the sweet spike of adrenaline hit him across the room. He didn't wait for her to approach. He didn't wait for protocol. He handed his goblet to a stunned Vesper and walked down the steps of the dais. He moved through the crowd, the nobles parting for him like the Red Sea, until he reached the doors. He stopped in front of her. He towered over her, a dark wolf looming over a red flower. "You are shaking," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. There are so many people, Alara whispered back, her eyes wide. They are all staring. Let them stare, Kalen said, extending his arm. They have never seen a star fall to earth before. Alara looked at him, startled by the poetry in his rough voice. She took his arm. His muscles were hard as stone. Beneath the velvet, a solid wall against the world. Dance with me, he commanded. The trap is set, and the players are on the board. If you're holding your breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop, hit that like button. Lady Vesper is about to make her move, and you won't want to miss the king's reaction. Now, to the dance floor. They moved to the center of the floor. The orchestra, sensing the king's mood, began a slow, haunting waltz. Kalen pulled her close, closer than propriety allowed. His hand splayed across the small of her back, burning through the velvet. As they moved, the world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them. You look, Kalen struggled for the word, his eyes scanning her face. Dangerous. Alara let out a breathless laugh. Dangerous? I am tripping over my own feet, sire. No, you are perfect. He spun her, his movements graceful despite his size. The noise is gone, Alara. When I look at you, the screaming stops completely. I am glad, she whispered, daring to rest her head against his chest for a moment. She could hear his heart, steady and strong. I was afraid. Of what? That you would see me in this dress, pretending to be a lady, and realize I am just a maid playing dress-up. Kalen stopped. They were in the middle of a turn, but he halted, forcing the dancers around them to scramble out of the way. He lifted her chin with a finger. You are not a maid, he growled, his voice vibrating with possession. You are the only real thing in this entire castle. You are my anchor. And tonight, his eyes darkened. Tonight, you look like a queen. From the sidelines, Lady Vesper watched, her face a mask of polite disinterest, but her nails were digging into her palms. The look on the king's face was unmistakable. It wasn't just lust. It was worship. She caught the eye of the captain of the guard, a man she had bribed heavily the night before. She nodded once. The music stopped abruptly. The heavy doors banged open, but not for a guest. A squad of guards marched in, their armor clanking. They didn't look at the king. They looked at Alara. Halt! The captain shouted, his voice booming over the confused murmurs of the crowd. Secure the exits! Kalen turned slowly, shielding Alara with his body. His hand went to the hilt of the sword at his hip. The golden light in his eyes flared, turning to molten lava. Captain, Kalen said, his voice a low rumble of thunder. You interrupt my dance. Explain yourself before I remove your tongue. The captain was sweating, but he held his ground. Forgive me, sire, but a crime has been reported. A theft of the highest treason. What theft? Lady Vesper stepped forward, feigning shock. My necklace, sire. The ancestral emerald. It is missing from my chambers, and... She paused for dramatic effect. One of the maids saw her taking it. She pointed a manicured finger at Alara. That is a lie, Kalen snarled. She has been with me. Not all day, sire, Vesper countered smoothly. She was in her room for hours, preparing. And we found this. The captain stepped forward, holding out a small velvet pouch. He upended it. A heavy emerald necklace, unmistakable in its design, spilled out onto the floor. Found in Lady Alara's mattress, the captain said. Hidden, the crowd gasped. Theft was a crime. Theft from a high noble was a death sentence. Alara stared at the jewels, her face draining of color. I didn't. I swear, Kaelin, I didn't. She used his name, in front of everyone. She speaks informally to the king, Vesper shrieked. See how she has bewildered him? Arrest her! 2 guards moved forward, reaching for Alara. Kaelin didn't speak. He didn't shout. He laughed. It was a terrible sound, a sound of breaking bones and crumbling mountains. Arrest her? Kaelin repeated. He released Alara and stepped forward. The air pressure in the room plummeted. The candles flickered and died, plunging the room into shadows, lit only by the glowing, infernal gold of the king's eyes. He began to shift, not fully, just enough. His hands lengthened into claws, his teeth sharpened into fangs. The beast was surfacing, not because of the madness, but because of pure, unadulterated rage. You think, Kaelin growled, stepping toward the captain, that I care about a necklace? He moved so fast, he blurred. One moment he was standing, the next, he had the captain by the throat, lifting him one-handed off the floor. You think, he roared, the dual voice of man and wolf echoing off the walls, that you can touch what is mine. He threw the captain. The armored man flew 30 feet, smashing into a banquet table in a shower of food and wood. The crowd screamed and scrambled back. Kaelin turned to Vesper. The beta woman froze, true terror finally dawning in her eyes. You set a trap, Kaelin whispered, stalking toward her. For a wolf? You brought a trap into my den? Sire, please. Vesper backed away. The law states that theft. I am the law, Kaelin bellowed. His control snapped. The red haze descended. But this time, it was focused. It wasn't blind rage. It was a laser-guided missile, aimed at everyone who had dared to threaten his anchor. He reached for Vesper. Kaelin! The voice was small, but it cut through the roar of the beast like a silver blade. Alara stepped in front of him. She put her hands on his chest, right over the tunic, right over the heart of the monster. Stop, she commanded. The court watched in horror. The king was in a blood rage. To touch him was suicide. Kaelin froze. His claws were inches from Vesper's face. He looked down at Alara. His chest heaved, his breath coming in snarls. They hurt you, he ground out. They tried, Alara said, her voice trembling but firm. But you are not a monster, Kaelin. Do not let them make you one. She looked up into his glowing eyes. Look at me, just me. The silence stretched, agonizing and long. Then, slowly, the claws retracted. The gold in his eyes dimmed. Kaelin slumped slightly, leaning his forehead against hers in the middle of the terrified ballroom. They tried to take you, he whispered brokenly. I am right here, she soothed. I am not going anywhere. She turned her head, keeping one hand on the king, and looked at Vesper. The Omega's eyes were cold, harder than they had ever been. Now, Alara said to the trembling room, let us talk about the truth. The ballroom was silent, save for the ragged breathing of the captain of the guard, who was groaning in the ruins of the banquet table. King Kaelin stood in the center of the floor, his hand gripping Alara's shoulder with bruising force. He had not shifted fully, but the danger radiating off him was palpable. He was a loaded weapon, and Alara was the only thing keeping the safety catch engaged. Alara turned to face the room. She looked small in her red dress, surrounded by armored guards and powerful nobles. But she did not cower. Something had shifted in her during the dance. She had felt the king's heart beat against hers. She had realized that his power was not something to fear. It was something that belonged to her, just as her peace belonged to him. "You accuse me of theft," Alara said, her voice clear and carrying to the rafters. Lady Vesper, recovering her composure, straightened her dress. "The evidence is on the floor, girl. The necklace was in your room." "My room," Alara repeated, "which is inside the king's private suite, which is guarded by 2 obsidian knights at all times." She looked at the guards by the door. "Did anyone enter the king's suite today?" The guards hesitated. They looked at Vesper, then at the king. "Answer her!" Kaelin roared, the sound making the chandeliers rattle. Only the cleaning staff, sire," one guard stammered. "And the laundry maid." "Which laundry maid?" Alara asked. "The new one. Girl named Jessa." Alara nodded. She looked at Silas, who had appeared at the king's side, looking pale but determined. "Silas, find Jessa. Bring her here." "There is no need for this charade," Vesper cried, her voice rising in pitch. "The Omega is a thief. She seduced the king, and now she plunders the treasury. My lords, are we to let a servant make a mockery of our laws? The king is compromised. He is unwell. Look at him." She gestured to Kaelin, who was vibrating with suppressed violence. "He is unfit to rule," Vesper shouted. "I call for a vote of competence. The council must intervene." A murmur went through the crowd. This was treason, but it was also a valid legal challenge. If the king was mad, the council could remove him. Alpha Magnus, the oldest member of the council, stepped forward. He looked at Kaelin, then at Vesper. "The accusation is grave," Magnus said gravely. "If the king is truly under the spell of a criminal—" "I am not under a spell," Kaelin snarled, stepping forward. "I am simply angry that you are all so stupid." "Kaelin," Alara warned softly, touching his arm. "No," Kaelin said, pulling away gently. "They want a judgment? I will give them one." He walked up the steps of the dais and sat on the obsidian throne. He didn't look mad. He looked imperious, cold. "Silas," Kaelin said, "where is the maid?" The side door opened. Silas entered, dragging a young woman by the arm. She was weeping hysterically. It was Jessa. "She was trying to leave the castle grounds, sire," Silas announced. With a bag of gold coins stamped with the Northern Duke's seal, he threw the bag onto the floor. It burst open, spilling gold coins that bore the crest of Vesper's family. The room went deadly silent. Vesper's face turned the color of ash. "Jessa," Kaelin said, his voice deceptively soft. "Look at me." The maid looked up, shaking. "Who gave you the gold?" I can't." "Look at me." Kaelin's voice carried the alpha command, a psychic weight that forced obedience. "Lady Vesper!" Jessa screamed, pointing at the redhead. "She gave it to me. She told me to put the necklace in the mattress. She said Alara was a witch who needed to be burned." The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Kaelin sat back. He looked at the council. He looked at Magnus. "Well?" Kaelin asked. "Is this the competence you were looking for?" Magnus bowed low, shame coloring his features. "Forgive us, sire. We were misled." Kaelin turned his gaze to Vesper. She was backing away, her eyes darting to the exits. "It's a lie. The maid is lying. She—" "Enough." Kaelin stood up. He walked down the steps. The crowd parted, leaving a wide circle around Vesper. "You accused my mate of theft," Kaelin said. The word dropped like a stone. Mate. He hadn't marked her yet, but he had claimed her verbally in front of the entire pack. "You tried to frame her. You tried to have her arrested. You tried to take the only thing in this world that brings me peace." Kaelin stopped in front of her. Vesper fell to her knees, clutching his boots. "Mercy, sire. I only did it for the kingdom. I thought—" "You thought you could take my crown," Kaelin corrected. "You thought I was a broken beast that you could leash." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "I am broken, Vesper. That part is true. But Elara—" He looked back at the girl in the red dress, standing tall and proud. "Elara is the glue that holds the pieces together. And you tried to dissolve her." He straightened up. "I will not kill you," Kaelin announced. "Death is too quick. And I promised Elara I would not be a monster tonight." "Thank you, sire. Thank you," Vesper sobbed. "You are banished," Kaelin said coldly, "to the Outlands. You will leave with nothing. No gold, no titles, no coat. You will walk out into the snow, Vesper, and you will see how long a viper survives in the frost." "No," Vesper whispered. The Outlands were a death sentence, just a slower, colder one. "Please, just kill me." "Get her out of my sight," Kaelin ordered. The guards, the same ones Vesper had tried to command, dragged her screaming from the hall. Kaelin stood in the center of the room, breathing hard. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him exhausted. He felt a small hand slip into his. He looked down. Elara was there. She didn't say a word. She just squeezed his hand. Kaelin looked at his court, at the terrified faces, at the council members who had been ready to betray him. "This ball is over," Kaelin declared. "Everyone out." He didn't wait for them to leave. He scooped Elara up into his arms, bridal style. She gasped, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Kaelin," she hissed. "People are watching." "Let them watch," the king said, carrying her toward the private exit. "I am taking my queen home." The royal chambers were quiet. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a silence as deep and soft as the snow piling up on the window ledges. Kaelin kicked the door shut behind him and carried Elara to the massive, fur-covered bed. He set her down gently, as if she were made of spun glass. He didn't pull away. He stood between her knees, his hands resting on the mattress on either side of her hips, trapping her. He was still breathing hard, the aftermath of the rage trembling in his muscles. "You called me your queen," Elara whispered, her hands resting on his chest. "I did," Kaelin rasped. "Because you are." He leaned his forehead against hers. "Do you know how close I was? In the ballroom? When they touched you? The wolf wanted to kill them all. Every single one of them. It wanted to burn the castle down just to make sure no one could ever touch you again." "I know," Elara said softly. "I felt it. And yet," Kaelin pulled back to look at her, wonder in his eyes. "You stopped it. You put your hand on my chest. And you stopped a force of nature." "I didn't stop it, Kaelin. I just gave it somewhere to go." She traced the line of his jaw. "You aren't just rage. You are protection. You were angry because you were protecting me." "I will always protect you," he vowed, "until the stars burn out, until my lungs stop working." He reached up and unclasped the circlet from her hair, setting it on the bedside table. Then he reached for the laces of her red dress. "May I?" he asked, his voice rough. Alara nodded. "Yes." The dress fell away, leaving her in the silver slip beneath. Kaelin looked at her with a reverence that made her heart ache. He traced the scars on her skin, the ones from Marta, the ones from the guards. "I will cover every scar with a kiss," he murmured, pressing his lips to her collarbone. "I will make you forget the pain." "I don't want to forget," Alara whispered, tilting her head back. "The pain led me to you." He kissed her then. It wasn't the tentative, gentle kiss of a courtier. It was the kiss of a starving man, finally finding a feast. It was deep, possessive, and overwhelming. As their lips met, the bond, the mating bond that had been simmering between them for weeks, snapped into place. It was a rush of golden light that flooded Alara's mind. She felt him. She felt his ancient, heavy sadness, his fear of his own madness, and underneath it all, a love so vast it terrified her. And he felt her. He felt her loneliness, her quiet strength, her melody. "Mine," Kaelin groaned against her mouth. "Yours," she promised. He claimed her then, marking the spot where her neck met her shoulder. The bite was sharp, a mixture of pain and pleasure that sealed their souls together. The energy of the bond flooded Kaelin's system, washing away the last dregs of the red haze. For the first time in his life, the static was gone completely. There was no noise, no screaming, just Alara. Epilogue. 1 year later, the nursery was painted a soft yellow, a stark contrast to the grim black stone of the rest of the castle. King Kaelin sat in a rocking chair that looked comically small for his massive frame. He was holding a bundle wrapped in white wool. He was humming. It was a low rumble of a sound, off-key and clumsy, but filled with immense care. "The moon is high, the night is deep." Alara leaned against the doorframe, watching him. She smiled, tired but happy. She walked over and rested her hand on his shoulder. "She is asleep, Kaelin," she whispered. Kaelin looked down at his daughter. The baby had tufts of black hair and Kaelin's nose, but when she opened her eyes, they were hazel, just like her mother's. "She is perfect," Kaelin whispered. "She is quiet. She screamed for 2 hours this morning." Alara laughed softly. "A warrior's scream," Kaelin defended, carefully tucking the blanket. He looked up at his mate. Alara was glowing, healthy, loved. The shadows under her eyes were gone. The fear was gone. "Dance with me?" Kaelin asked, standing up carefully with the baby in one arm. "Now?" Alara raised an eyebrow. "Without music?" "We don't need music," Kaelin said, pulling her close with his free arm. "We have the silence." They swayed together in the quiet nursery, the king, the queen, and the little princess. The ravager was gone, replaced by a father and a husband. The monster had been tamed, not by a sword, but by a song. And in the heart of the Silverclaw Fortress, the dance went on, eternal and free.